Okay, so as you can see, this is an RC10 B2. I haven't made any videos on this, even though I did pick it up some months ago, and I actually picked up two of these because between the two of them I could combine the parts to make one decent one. So I did that. I tore them down, I cleaned the parts up, put it all back together, and I didn't make any videos of this because frankly I wasn't too excited about it. Going through the process of restoring this B2 reminded me a lot of what it was like to run my B4.1 factory team that I used to race for like 2 or 3 years. That car was good, but it was made of just like cheap plastic, and it wore out a lot, and it was a lot of maintenance. And as I was working through this B2, even though it's a simpler car, it takes fewer screws to get to certain things. The plastics are very similar. The geometry is almost exactly the same. It's just a simpler version of the B4, really. So that's not to say that it's slow or bad. Like, this is a very fast buggy when you do race it. This clearly has had a lot of success at the national and even the world's level, so I can't knock it for that. But it was just unexciting. And some of the things about it that to me make it unexciting, on top of the fact that it just uses cheap plastics, is just the lack of tunability. So the B2 front tower, you got 3 holes here for the shock tower, okay, fine. But for the inner camber link, 1 hole. The caster block, 1 hole. Same caster block you would use on the RC10 team car or world's car, right? So this caster block and spindle arrangement is exactly the same. It's for the B3. This was updated to a different unit that I think had some more tunability. And on the B3 front shock tower, they added, I think, another hole here. Whoop-de-doo, another hole. On the Kyosho Pro X, you have 9 holes here that you can play with. It doesn't offer a whole lot. Really, the thing with associated cars, because for this era they were simpler, you focus a lot more on the shocks, getting the springs, the dampers, the oil right, and just fiddling with the shock angle. And really that's enough for these cars. You don't need much more than that. But just the lack of tunability also just makes it uninteresting. Same thing at the rear, right? You get 2 holes here on the rear inner camber link, and then for the rear hub carrier, 1 hole. This is the same as your RC10 GT hub carrier, right? There's no tunability here. When you got to the B3, they added, I think, they had a total of 3 holes here on the outside, but the inside for the chassis, I believe, was the same, so you get a little more. And then on the B4, of course, they had a totally different hub carrier with different towers, so you can have like an A block or a B block with 4 holes each. Had a lot of tunability there. But yeah, this is a very simple car. And parts of it, to me, feel weak. So, for instance, where the inner camber link mounts, this ball stud mounts into what you would think is a bulkhead, but it's really actually part of the chassis. This chassis mold goes up, and you have 2 holes here that the ball stud mounts through. So if this breaks, then you need a new chassis, which sucks. So hopefully it doesn't break. Now if you're smart, like this I don't really plan on running, but if I were running it, I might put like a nut in here to help fasten down the ball stud, because if the thread gets loose in the plastic here, then this is going to want to back out. But in order to do that, I'd have to actually shave away at this tower, because the tower mounts onto the chassis as well, and as you can see, there's basically no clearance between the tower and the thread for the ball stud. So if I did want to secure the ball stud better, I'd have to shave this part out. But as I'm doing that, because this tower mounts with 2 holes down here and 2 holes up here, if I'm shaving this out, then I'm reducing the structural integrity of how the tower actually braces to the chassis, because there's only this sort of like W link here between these 2 top holes and those bottom holes there. If I start removing this, this is going to get weaker. Okay, maybe it's okay, but that would worry me. So you could get around that by just running it to the outer hole here, okay, and then you don't have to modify the tower, and you can just fasten this down with a nut without any clearance issues. But then you're just running on the outer hole. You can have high camber gain, which means you would need to run on a high grip track. So that's kind of it. The only modifications I made were this piece here. It's just a carbon fiber plate for the battery mount. None of the two cars I had the original battery mount, which is just like this thin plastic line that runs down and it kind of goes into this little hole here on the bottom of the tower, and that's what holds the battery down. I don't know what inspired Team Associated to do it this way, where you have just this one post coming up the center and this one line going down, because on the World's car you had a battery cup with, you know, screws on either side and you could put a brace down. And then later on the B4, they kind of went back to that, where you had two thumb screws on either side with a battery mount. So if you wanted to do that for this, I kind of measured it out. You'd have to drill a hole through the chassis, basically right at these two corners, and put a post there, an aluminum post, and then put the thumb screws in. And I didn't want to drill holes through this chassis, so I just, instead of doing that, I basically just put this plate on. I also had to modify this part here because there was a screw that was stuck in here, so I had to chop that off and then put a new screw in, basically like a long set screw, and then take this little sort of mount piece and screw that in. So, you know, it works. It's not original, but it does work. The other change I made to this was the front arms. So RPM did make front arms for the B3. The B3 does have longer arms than the B2, because for the B3, the front caster block, the way it mounts kind of pulls the axle in a bit. So technically, if you're running B3 front arms with the old, you know, B2 or World's car style caster block and spindles, it will make the front wider by a few millimeters. So technically not legal if you're getting down to what's the legal width to run a car. One way to maybe accommodate for that would be to take these offset rims and run them backwards, so to run this disc on the inside, and that would help to pull the front in a little bit, and that would give you something more like the correct front width. Okay, and then on the rear, all I did in the rear was replace the slipper unit. Okay, so this is a B4 style slipper unit. Very hard to find those octagon style slipper pads, especially the orange ones. I think they still make the white ones. So I went with something else. I think it's Revolution Racing Designs, or Revolution Designs, that's the name. They make these interesting fiberglass slipper pads. And I think they also make carbon fiber ones as well. So I got some white fiberglass ones with a B4 style slipper, threw them on, and there you go. Piece of cake. These turnbuckles are, I think they're B4 turnbuckles, so they're a little bit long for the application. So, you know, there's, as you can see, like, there's not a whole lot of thread left on the inner camber link turnbuckles. You know, I could get different length turnbuckles to correct for this, but I just wanted to use what I had lying around. So I just used these, and they work okay. You know, I can get to the right length to make this all work. Yeah, outside of that, this is super simple. Some people like the fact that the B2 is a simple car because it makes it easy to work on, and that's fair enough. I just don't like how it feels kind of fragile. You know, it reminds me a lot of the B4 again. And these parts, the quality of the plastic, they're going to wear. And some of them will wear out faster than others, like the rear hub carriers. I've had problems with those, with like the crush tube that goes between the inner and outer bearings, kind of collapsing a little bit, and that causes the bearings to break essentially over time. Another worry I have is with the inner arm mount here. This plastic piece that goes in here is kind of small, and it looks like if you really rail you know, your rear wheel against something hard, that's probably a weak spot that'll snap. Those are really hard to find. Those are probably harder to find than front arms for the B2, which are already pretty hard to find. That's why I got the RPM arms. You can get 3D printed versions of these, but those are even weaker than the original plastic, which is already cheap plastic. It's kind of weak. So all that stuff combined makes me kind of think, you know, even though it's a good car, it's not something that I'm likely to race at the Vintage Nationals. So for now, I'm just going to throw it on the shelf. Maybe I'll sell it one day or something, I don't know. But I figured I'd at least give you the courtesy of showing you, oops, I guess that light went out, what this car looks like. Very simple, you know, pretty clean. But that's kind of it for this. I don't really have any other plans for it. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.